Welcome back to Respectfully, You're the Problem, the podcast where we develop self awareness because who consciously wants to be the asshole? I'm your host, Caroline, and today I want you to imagine someone walking into a room. They walk in confidently. Their head is up, they introduce themselves, they're comfortable talking to people that they have never even met. They tell stories, they laugh loudly, and they take up space without apologizing for it. Now, one person in that room is going to look at them and think, I love their energy. Someone else is going to think they're a little full of themselves. Another person's going to think, God, I wish I could be that confident. Here's what's interesting. Everybody is looking at the same person. So why are they all seeing somebody different? The person who is comfortable with confidence may find them inspiring. The person who wishes they could speak that freely probably feels intimidated. Someone who grew up believing that taking up space was rude probably thinks they're obnoxious. And someone who has been manipulated by a charming person before may immediately become suspicious. Each reaction tells us something about the person that walked into the room, but it also tells us a lot about the person observing them. Here's a quote that I've been thinking about. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. And that idea can be a little uncomfortable because we like to think that we see people clearly. We notice the energy. We read the room. We have excellent intuition, right? But every person we meet is viewed through a lens. And that lens has been shaped by our childhood, our relationships, our insecurities, our expectations, and all the things that we've survived. So, two people can look at the same behavior and see completely different things. One can see confidence, and the other will see arrogance. One might see independence, and the other sees emotional distance. One could see honesty, and the other will see it as cruelty. And one person could see something as a boundary, and the other person will see it as rejection. The behavior may be the same, the meaning changes depending on who's looking at it. One of my favorite psychologists, and he was insanely impactful, Carl Jung, spent a lot of his work exploring this hidden part of human behavior. How the pieces of ourselves we haven't fully understood can shape the way we see other people. Sometimes we are reacting to the person in front of us. Sometimes we're reacting to someone they remind us of. And sometimes we are reacting to a part of ourselves that we haven't made peace with yet. So today, we're going to talk about the invisible lens you carry into every friendship, relationship, conflict, and uncomfortable room. We're going to talk about projection, the shadow, and those strangely powerful reactions that make you say, I don't really know what it is about that person, but I really don't like them, which is always a calm and reliable beginning to a psychological investigation that we're so skilled in conducting. Now, this episode isn't about assuming every problem exists in your head. Some people really are difficult. Some behavior really is harmful. And sometimes your instincts really are picking up on something important. But if you want to see other people clearly, you also have to understand the person doing the observing. Because the world you experience is shaped by what happens around you and also by everything happening within you. And to understand that, we need to talk about why your past has a habit of showing up in your present, usually uninvited and rarely empty handed. Have you ever had a reaction that felt much bigger than the actual moment? Someone says one small thing and suddenly you're furious, or embarrassed, or ready to withdraw from the relationship and begin a new quiet life where nobody knows your name. Maybe your partner asks you, "Hey, are you sure you paid that bill?" That's a fairly ordinary question, but something about it hits you wrong. "Yes, I paid it. Why would you assume that I didn't?" Then they say, "I wasn't assuming anything. I was just asking." But now you're irritated because it didn't feel like a question. It felt like a criticism. It felt like they were saying you're irresponsible or careless or incapable of handling basic adult responsibilities. Meanwhile, your partner is confused. They thought they were asking about the electric bill. They had no idea. They were also speaking to every other person who has ever made you feel incompetent. Maybe you grew up around someone who constantly questioned your decisions. Maybe mistakes were treated like evidence that something was wrong with you. Maybe you had a previous partner who made you feel like you couldn't be trusted to handle anything. So when somebody asks one innocent question today, you don't only hear the words they say, you hear all the old meanings attached to them. The past has entered the conversation and it didn't knock, it did not introduce itself, it just pulled up a chair and started contributing. And Carl Jung had a term that helps explain this. He called them complexes. Now, that word can sound a little intense, like we're about to diagnose someone based on how they load the dishwasher, which, depending on how they load it, may still be necessary. In simple language, a complex is an emotionally charged cluster of memories, beliefs, fears, and experiences. Think of it like an old emotional knot. Most of the time, you go through life without even noticing it. Then someone says something, uses a particular tone, looks at you a certain way, and pulls the knot tight. That's why one comment can barely affect one person and completely unravel another. The comment touched something different in each of them. Here's an example. A friend cancels plans. Someone may think, "Oh, that's disappointing, but we'll reschedule." And you may feel immediately unimportant. And the feeling arrives fast because the cancellation connected with every other time you felt overlooked, left out, or easily disappointed. And your mind isn't responding to one canceled plan in isolation. It's responding to the collection of disappointments that you carry with you. That's what makes the reaction feel so convincing. It comes with history. Or maybe someone gives you gentle feedback at work. They say, "Hey, next time, could you include a little more detail?" And all you hear is, "You're not good at this." Now your chest gets tight. You start explaining yourself. You list every reason the task turned out the way that it did. You're defending your intelligence, your work ethic, and your entire bloodline. That reaction may come from years of believing that mistakes made you less valuable. The present moment simply found the bruise. And I want to make something clear here. Recognizing that you've been triggered doesn't mean the other person automatically did nothing wrong. People can be dismissive, they can criticize you unfairly, and they can use a tone they absolutely knew they were using. We're not releasing anybody from accountability. We're trying to understand why certain moments carry so much emotional weight. Sometimes the current situation explains the reaction. Sometimes an older wound adds intensity. Most of the time, both are present. And the awareness comes from asking, what part of this belongs to today and what part just feels familiar? That second question can reveal a lot. Maybe your partner's question sounded like your parents' criticism. Maybe your friend's cancellation felt like a childhood exclusion. Maybe your manager's feedback brought back the shame of never feeling good enough. The people in your life can unknowingly step into the roles written long before they even met you. And if you don't recognize the role you've placed them in, you may be responding to the past while believing you're responding only to the present. This is why self awareness involves more than just knowing your personality type or saying, I know I overthink. Real self awareness happens in the moment when you feel that reaction rising and you become curious about it. You think, why did that affect me so deeply? What did I hear beneath the actual words? What older feeling just showed up? You don't have to shame yourself for the reaction. You don't have to solve your entire childhood before dinner. That is honestly a lot to ask for a Tuesday. You simply notice that more than one moment may be happening inside you. There is the situation that's happening in front of you, and then there's everything that that situation awakened inside of you. And once you recognize that, you gain a choice. You can tell the person, when you asked me that, I felt as though you didn't trust me. I know that may have not been your intent, but that's where my mind went. Now you're talking to the experience instead of attacking them for an intention you haven't even confirmed yet. That's how self awareness begins changing your relationships. You stop asking new people to answer for old pain that they did not create. You also become better at recognizing when something happening now genuinely needs to be addressed. But old pain doesn't only change the way we hear people, sometimes it changes the way we see them entirely. We begin assigning them motives, emotions, and qualities that may have as much to do with us as they do with them. And that brings us to one of Jung's most fascinating ideas: projection. Or, in simpler terms, what happens when your stuff starts wearing somebody else's face. So let's talk about projection. And before anybody gets nervous, projection does not mean that every problem you have with another person is secretly your fault. Some people really are rude. Some people really are dishonest. And some people really do have an energy that says, I am going to make this group vacation unnecessarily difficult. Projection is what happens when something inside of you, usually something you haven't fully recognized, starts shaping what you see in someone else. You may assign them a motive that they never expressed. You may exaggerate a trait because it touches something uncomfortable in you. Or you may recognize something in them that you've worked very hard to avoid seeing in yourself. Let's say you meet someone who talks openly about their accomplishments. They're proud of what they built. They're comfortable admitting that they're good at what they do. And something about them irritates you immediately. They're so full of themselves. They think they're better than everyone. Maybe they are arrogant. That possibility remains available. Self awareness does not require us to pretend every loud person is simply misunderstood. But your reaction may also contain information about you. Maybe you were taught that talking about yourself was bragging. Maybe every time you felt proud, someone reminded you not to get a big head. Maybe you learned to shrink yourself so that other people would remain comfortable. Now you're watching someone break a rule you've followed your entire life. They're taking up space you never gave yourself permission to occupy. And what feels like disgust may contain a little envy. Not because you want to be them, but because some part of you wants the freedom they seem to have. That's projection in one of its quieter forms. The reaction points outward, but the emotional charge may be coming from within you. Jung believed that projection happens unconsciously. We don't usually wake up and decide, today I'm going to place my unresolved issues on Janet. Poor Janet. It feels as though we're simply observing the truth about someone. That's what makes projection difficult to recognize. It doesn't arrive sounding like an interpretation, it arrives sounding like certainty. You'll hear people say, I know what kind of person they are. I can tell what they're trying to do. I see right through them. And sometimes you do. But whenever you feel extremely certain about another person's hidden motives, especially before you know them, that certainty deserves a second look. Imagine someone who has struggled with dishonesty in their own life. They're probably going to hide things and tell partial truths. They leave out details and then defend themselves saying, well, you never asked. A classic legal defense presented by someone who is not currently in court. That person may become unusually suspicious of everyone around them. They check for inconsistencies, they analyze every explanation, they assume people are hiding things because they know how easily things can be hidden. They understand the behavior from the inside. Or think about somebody who has a lot of anger but doesn't believe they're allowed to express it. They pride themselves on being calm, agreeable, and easygoing. But everywhere they go, they encounter aggressive people. The cashier had an attitude. Their coworker was hostile. Their partner's tone was disrespectful. Somebody around them seems angry all the time. Meanwhile, their own anger has been sitting in the basement for 15 years lifting weights. Because they can't recognize the anger as a part of themselves, they become highly sensitive to anything that resembles it in anybody else. What we refuse to see within ourselves often becomes impossible to ignore in other people. And Jung expressed it this way: projections change the world into the replica of one's unknown face. And in simpler terms, we start seeing ourselves everywhere without realizing it's us. Our fear appears to be their intention. Our insecurity appears to be their judgment. Our hidden anger appears to be their hostility. Our need for attention becomes their desperate need for attention. And projection isn't limited to negative traits. We can project positive qualities too. We meet someone and immediately decide that they're extraordinary. They're different from everyone else. They understood you in a way that nobody ever has. They're confident, brilliant, emotionally evolved, and apparently free of every ordinary human flaw. You may be seeing something real in them, but you may also be placing your hopes, desires, and fantasies onto someone you barely know. You aren't seeing the whole person yet. You're seeing the person plus everything you need them to be. That's why someone can seem perfect at the beginning of a relationship and completely different several months later. And sometimes they do change because they're, good at hiding it or their feelings change. But sometimes the image we created became impossible for any real person to maintain. We don't only project our fears, we project our fantasies. This is where the quote at the center of this episode becomes so important. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. We see through our unmet needs, our old wounds, our hidden desires, our unclaimed qualities. And until we become conscious of those things, they will influence our relationships from behind the scenes. Now, there's an important balance here. Sometimes your reaction is alerting you to something genuine. The person may actually be manipulative, they may actually be arrogant, and they may be hiding something. Jung's idea wasn't that the other person always gives us nothing to react to. Often, there is a real trait or behavior there. Projection changes the size, meaning, or certainty that we attach to it. Someone may be slightly dismissive, but because you've spent your life feeling invisible, their behavior feels like complete rejection. Someone may enjoy attention, but because you deny your own desire to be seen, their confidence feels unbearable. Someone may need reassurance, but because you're ashamed of your own needs, you label them as too needy. The behavior belongs to them. The intensity of your reaction may tell you something about yourself. So, how can you tell when you might be projecting? Pay attention to the people who create an immediate, intense reaction in you. The person you cannot stop criticizing, the stranger you've already decided to misunderstand, the person you idealize before they've had time to disappoint you, the trait you condemn in everybody else, but explain carefully when you do it. When they do it, it's manipulation. When I do it, there's context. Well, let's ask yourself, what exactly am I reacting to? What evidence do I have about their intention? Does this trait exist somewhere in me, even in a different form? Is this person doing something I secretly wish I had permission to do? Does my reaction match this moment, or does it feel much older? These questions are so uncomfortable because projection protects the version of ourselves we prefer to believe. It allows us to keep the unwanted trait over there inside somebody else. But whatever you place entirely outside of yourself remains outside of your control. The moment you recognize your part, you gain the ability to work on it. And that doesn't make you guilty, it makes you conscious. And consciousness is where change begins. And beneath many of our strongest projections is a part of ourselves that we've rejected, hidden, or never been allowed to know. Jung called this part the shadow. And no, this is not where the episode becomes paranormal. Although emotionally, we are about to enter the basement. Carl Jung called the hidden, rejected parts of our personality the shadow. And when people first hear that, they usually imagine some dark, sinister version of themselves lurking in the background, like you, but in fluorescent lighting and a very suspicious trench coat. But the shadow is so much more ordinary than that. It contains the qualities, emotions, needs, and impulses that you learned were unacceptable. Maybe you were taught that anger was disrespectful, needing reassurance was weak, wanting attention was embarrassing. Taking pride in yourself was arrogant. Saying no was selfish. Being vulnerable gave people the opportunity to hurt you. So you adapted. You learned which parts of you received approval and which parts created problems. And then you started presenting the acceptable version. You became helpful, easygoing, independent, responsible, strong, low maintenance, a delight to have in class. Meanwhile, everything that didn't fit that identity got pushed somewhere less visible. But hidden doesn't mean gone. Those parts continue influencing your reactions, your choices, and the people who make you unusually uncomfortable. Imagine someone who built their entire identity on being kind. They're patient. They avoid confrontation. They rarely say no. They say things like, it's fine. Whatever works for everybody else. I don't want to make it a big deal. It is already a big deal. They simply plan to bring it up 3 months from now during an unrelated argument. This person doesn't think of themselves as angry. Anger doesn't fit with being the kind one, so they swallow it. They overcommit, they allow people to cross boundaries, and they keep smiling. And then their anger will slip out sideways. Sarcasm, passive aggressive comments, resentment, withdrawing affection, saying, do whatever you want, in a tone that clearly indicates there is only one correct answer. Their anger became part of the shadow. It didn't disappear, it lost the ability to communicate directly. An emotion you refuse to acknowledge will find another way to speak. Now, think about the person who prides themselves on being strong. I personally have so much experience with this. They handle everything, they never ask for help. They're the one who everyone calls during a crisis. They say things like, I've got it, I'll figure it out, I don't need anybody. Then nobody offers to help them. And they feel completely abandoned. They're hurt that no one recognized a need they worked very hard to conceal. Everybody was apparently expected to receive the distress signal through telepathy. Their need for support didn't vanish. It entered the shadow because needing people felt dangerous, disappointing, or shameful. Now that hidden need affects the way that they interpret everybody else. They see people asking for help and think, why can't they just handle anything themselves? They see emotionally vulnerable people and call it weakness. They resent people for receiving the support they never allowed themselves to request. Sometimes the trait that bothers you in another person is something you have denied yourself permission to express. The person you call attention seeking may be comfortable asking to be seen. The person you call too emotional may be comfortable expressing feelings emotionally that you learned to hide. The person you call selfish may simply have boundaries that you're actually afraid to create. The confident person may awaken the confidence you buried to remain likable. Your shadow doesn't only contain qualities you consider bad. It can also hold your boldness, your creativity, your ambition, your sexuality, your sensitivity, your ability to lead, and your desire to be recognized. Some people spend years trying to become more confident when their confidence has been there the whole time, waiting for permission to come out. Maybe you learned that shining too brightly made people uncomfortable. It often does. Maybe success caused tension in your family. Maybe being expressive attracted criticism. So you became smaller. Then you meet someone who refuses to shrink, and their presence irritates you. You call them loud, dramatic, desperate for attention. And perhaps they are a little dramatic. Again, two things can be true, but the intensity of your reaction may be coming from the part of you that wants to know what it feels like to live that freely. That's why shadow work can be incredibly uncomfortable. The person irritating you may be showing you a trait that you deny even having. The person intimidating you may be expressing a quality that you just haven't claimed. The person you envy may be living out a desire that you're just too afraid to admit. And sometimes the shadow appears in the stories that we tell ourselves. Oh, I'm just brutally honest. Maybe cruelty is hiding inside that honesty. I'm independent. Maybe fear is hiding around in that independence. I'm always helping everybody. Control, I think, is hiding somewhere in that helpfulness. I hate drama. I'm just going to let everybody sit with that one on their own. The goal isn't to attack yourself or, turn every good quality into a secret character flaw. Kindness can be genuine, independence can be healthy, helping people can be beautiful. We become more self-aware when we examine what those qualities sometimes protect us from feeling. Ask yourself, what am I never allowed to be? What emotion makes me feel ashamed? What do I judge people most harshly for? What quality do I secretly envy? What do I need but struggle to ask for? You may discover that your shadow has been appearing in your relationship for years. In the arguments where you insist you were fine, in the resentment you can't explain, in the people you judge immediately, in the compliments that you struggle to receive, in the desires that you dismiss before even giving them an honest name. Meeting your shadow means becoming curious about all of you: the generous parts, the jealous parts, the calm parts, the angry parts, the independent parts, the parts that desperately want someone to notice they're tired. And you don't have to act on every feeling. And as a matter of fact, you should not. You don't have to express every impulse. You simply stop pretending that those parts don't exist. Because when you acknowledge your anger, you can communicate it responsibly. When you acknowledge your jealousy, you can learn what it's trying to reveal. When you acknowledge your need for support, you can ask for it instead of quietly punishing people for failing to guess. The parts of you that remain hidden tend to control you indirectly. It's like the puppet master behind the scenes. The parts of you that you bring into awareness become choices. And that is where the real growth begins. Not only in becoming a perfectly positive, endless, healed person who never has an ugly thought, that person does not exist. Growth means becoming honest enough to recognize what is happening inside you before you place it entirely into someone else. It means allowing yourself to become a whole person instead of just performing the most acceptable version. And that performance, the carefully edited version of ourselves that we present to the world, was another major part of Jung's psychology. He called it the persona. The persona is the person everybody thinks they know. The shadow is everything that person has been working to hide. So if the shadow contains the parts of ourselves we hide, the persona is the version we allow everybody to meet. The word persona originally referred to a mask worn by actors. Jung used it to describe the social face that we present to the world, the version of ourselves that knows how to function, fit in, and receive approval. We all have one. Actually, we have several. There's the version of you who goes to work, the version of you who meets your partner's family, the version of you who answers the phone when you don't recognize the number. Adjusting your behavior to different situations is normal. You probably shouldn't speak to your manager exactly the way you speak to your best friend. And there are thoughts that absolutely belong in the privacy of your own mind. The persona helps us move through the world. It becomes a problem when we get so attached to that role that we forget that there is a person underneath it. Maybe your persona is the strong one. Everybody comes to you when life falls apart. You solve problems, you remain calm, you know what to do. People describe you as resilient, and you are resilient, but eventually being strong stops feeling like something you can do and starts feeling like something you must constantly prove. So when you're struggling, you disappear. When you're overwhelmed, you just say you're busy. When somebody asks about how you're doing, you say, I'm good, which could mean anything from I'm having a wonderful day to I have emotionally left the building. The persona keeps doing its job. It protects your image as a strong one, but it also makes it difficult for anyone to know when you need support. No single quality can hold the full weight of being a human being. When you become too identified with one version of yourself, every feeling that contradicts it has to go somewhere. The strong person hides the need for help. The generous person hides resentment. The independent person hides their loneliness. The calm person hides their anger. The healed person hides the fact that something still hurts. And where do all those hidden feelings go? Back to the shadow. That's the relationship between the two. The more polished and limited the persona becomes, the more of yourself you may have to conceal to maintain it. And this also affects how we see other people. If your persona is built around being responsible, you may have very little patience for someone who is disorganized. If you've built your identity around self sacrifice, somebody who's setting a boundary may look selfish. If you're always composed, an emotionally expressive person may look unstable. If you never ask for attention, someone who openly wants recognition may make you very uncomfortable. We often judge people for violating rules we never realized we created for ourselves. So ask yourself, what version of me does everyone expect to meet? What role do I automatically play? What happens when I don't perform it? Who am I afraid I would disappoint if I changed? Maybe people would be surprised to learn that the strong one is tired. The funny one is hurting. The easygoing one has opinions and the independent one wants to be cared for. Letting people see more of you doesn't erase the qualities they already love. It gives those qualities somewhere honest to live. Strength becomes healthier when it includes asking for help. Kindness becomes more sustainable when it includes boundaries. Independence becomes less lonely when it allows connection. And humor becomes more intimate when it doesn't have to hide every wound. Jung's larger goal for his entire life and study was wholeness. That means allowing more of who you are into the conscious life instead of dividing yourself into the acceptable parts and the parts that nobody is allowed to see. You are always more than the role you learn to perform. Once you understand that everybody has a persona, something else becomes obvious. The version of another person you see in public is never the whole person. You're seeing what they are ready to show. You're seeing the composed face, the selected moment, the picture they decided was safe to post. Then we compare their public persona to our private reality and wonder why everybody else's life looks easier. Which brings us to social media, the world's largest meeting of carefully managed emotional representatives. Social media has given us more access and information about other people than we have ever had before. And somehow, we still have absolutely no idea what is actually going on in anybody else's life. We see a picture of someone at dinner, they're dressed up, holding their drink, the lighting's good, and we think, well, they're clearly doing great. But nothing says emotional stability like one carefully selected picture next to a margarita. We see the vacation, the new relationship, the promotion, the family photo, the clean kitchen. What we don't see is what happens before the picture, or what happens after it, or what it took for that person to smile when it was being taken. Maybe they cried in the car on the way there. Maybe their relationship is struggling. Maybe they're worried about money. Maybe someone they love is sick. A happy moment can be real without representing an entirely happy life. But we forget that. We look at a few visible moments and use them to write the parts of the story that we can't see. And this doesn't only make other people's lives look easier, it affects the way that we interpret the way they treat us. For example, maybe your friend hasn't called you recently. They haven't checked in, you've barely heard from them, but you're seeing them posting online. They went to dinner, they attended a birthday party, they shared a funny video, and your mind says, they have time for all that, but they don't have time for me. And that feeling can hurt, especially when you miss someone, especially when you've been trying to maintain the friendship, especially when being forgotten or overlooked already touches something sensitive in you. But there's a mistake that we often make in that moment. We assume visibility means availability. Posting a picture takes seconds. Having an honest conversation may require more emotional energy that person does not currently have. Going to dinner may have been the one plan that they managed to keep all month. Sharing a meme does not mean somebody has the capacity to explain their grief, their depression, their family problems, or why getting through an ordinary day has become difficult. You may be seeing evidence that they're still alive and interpreting it as evidence that they deliberately neglected you. But before we decide someone's silence is a statement about our value, it's worth considering what we can't see. We expect people to understand that our silence might mean we're overwhelmed. But when someone else becomes silent, we often decide it means they don't care. We want our behavior interpreted with compassion, but we interpret theirs through our wounds. This is where the persona comes back into the picture. If you're known as the strong one, people may assume you're fine. If you're the funny one, people may not recognize when the humor is covering something painful. If your social media shows you going out, working, smiling, or continuing with life, people may believe that there's nothing to worry about. They're seeing the version of you that you've shown them. Then they're filling in everything else, just like you do when you look at them. Social media gives us fragments, a face, a caption, a location, a 10-second video. Our minds create continuity between those fragments and call it someone's life. But you can't accurately judge the weight of what someone is carrying from the way they presented one moment. You can watch every story they post and still know nothing about the story that they are living. And this is why we see things as we are matters so much. If you feel lonely, you may see someone else's dinner as proof that you were excluded. If you feel stuck, their success may look effortless. If you feel unsupported, their silence may look selfish. If you feel insecure in the friendship, every visible moment without you may feel like evidence that you've been replaced. Their post didn't create that meaning all by itself. The meaning came from the place inside you that was already hurting. That doesn't make the hurt unreasonable. It gives you a clear understanding of what you need. Maybe you need reassurance. Maybe you need more consistency. Maybe you need to tell your friend that you miss them. Maybe you need to ask what they're going through before deciding what their silence means. Compassion doesn't mean accepting a one sided relationship forever. It means gathering more of the story before making someone's behavior entirely about you. Everybody you know is living a life beyond the parts that include you. That life may contain pain that they've never expressed, responsibilities you know nothing about, and battles that never make it into the caption. The emotionally mature question isn't always, why haven't they shown up for me? Sometimes it's, what might they be carrying that I can't see? And then, with that same compassion, what am I carrying that I need to communicate instead of hoping someone else notices? This is how we stop living entirely inside the stories that our minds create. We become aware of the lens. We notice the wound influencing what we see. And we give the truth a chance to be larger than our first interpretation. Carl Jung's work was deeply concerned with making the unconscious conscious. And in everyday language, that means catching your mind while it's quietly filling in the blanks. And there is a name for that ability: metacognition, or more simply, learning how to notice yourself before you become completely convinced by yourself. So now you understand the lens. Your past shapes it. Your complexes create emotional pressure points. Your shadow contains what you haven't fully accepted. Your persona presents the version of you that feels safest to show. And projection can place all of that into the people around you. So the next question is, how do you catch it while it's happening? Because recognizing a pattern 3 days after you sent the paragraph is helpful, but the real goal is eventually catching it somewhere around sentence 2. That's where metacognition comes in. Metacognition simply means noticing your own thinking. You're able to step back from a thought long enough to look at it instead of immediately following it wherever it leads. Your mind can suggest the trip, and you are not legally required to get on the flight. Imagine you see something online that activates you, or someone's tone changes, or a person does something that immediately feels rejecting, disrespectful, or suspicious. Your first reaction arrives. They don't care about me. They're trying to embarrass me. They think they're better than me. I've been replaced. Usually, we take that first interpretation and we just run with it. We collect evidence, replay previous moments, we assign motives, we draft a message. Sometimes we also send the message, which is where the evening begins to lose structure. Metacognition creates a little space before all of that happens. So you notice, I'm having a strong reaction. Then you become curious. Okay, what did I actually observe? What meaning did I give it? What did this bring up in me? And one of the most useful questions you can ask is, am I responding to the person or to someone that they remind me of? Now, you don't need to ask these questions every single time. This is self awareness, not a written exam. Sometimes one question is enough to interrupt the story. For example, what else could be true? Maybe they're upset with you. Maybe they're overwhelmed. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe your instinct noticed something important. The pause gives you time to find out. You're not forcing yourself into a positive explanation. You're making room for a complete one. And the way you speak to yourself during this process matters. Self awareness can often turn into another weapon if every realization becomes, I'm so toxic. I always ruin everything. What is wrong with me? And attacking yourself does not make you more accountable. It usually makes you defensive, ashamed, or desperate to prove that you weren't the problem after all. But as we know, respectfully, sometimes you are the problem. Try speaking to yourself the way that you would someone that you genuinely care about. Try thinking, I can see why that affected me. This feeling is connected to something older. I may not have the full story yet. I need a moment before I respond. That's a big one. You can understand your reaction without allowing it to control your behavior. You can have compassion for the wound while taking responsibility for what you do with it. That is the balance. Compassion says this reaction came from somewhere. And accountability asks, where am I going to take it? Carl Jung used the word individuation to describe the lifelong process of becoming more whole. And that means getting to know all the parts of you well enough that they no longer have to control you from behind the scenes. It means that you recognize the persona, you meet the shadow, you notice the projection, you understand the old wound. And instead of dividing yourself into good parts and bad parts, you begin relating to yourself as a complete human being. A complicated little ecosystem just doing its best. The goal is not to reach a point where nothing ever triggers you. I don't even think that's possible. Life will continue providing opportunities for personal growth with absolutely no concern for your schedule. The growth is in what happens next. You pause, you notice, you ask, you choose your response with more awareness than you had before. That small pause can save a conversation. It can protect a friendship. It can stop an old wound from writing the next chapter of a new relationship. And sometimes it can show you that the thing you were so certain you saw in someone else was actually revealing something within you that needed your attention. Which brings us back to the quote that we started with. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. At the beginning of the episode, we imagined someone walking into a room. One person saw confidence, another saw arrogance, someone felt inspired, someone else felt intimidated. Same person, same room, different eyes. This is what I want you to carry with you into this next week. Every time you look at someone, you're looking through a lens. That lens contains your past, your fears, your expectations, your hidden needs, the parts of yourself that you're proud of, and the parts of yourself you haven't fully made peace with yet. Sometimes your lens helps you recognize something important. Sometimes it finds an old pattern before your conscious mind can explain it. And sometimes it places an old story over a new person. Self awareness is learning how to tell the difference. So here's your challenge this week. The next time someone creates a strong reaction in you, resist the urge to immediately decide what that reaction proves about them. Give yourself one pause, preferably before sending anything with multiple paragraphs, and ask yourself 3 questions. What am I seeing? What is this bringing up in me? What else might be true? Maybe you'll discover that your reaction is showing you the real boundary that needs to be addressed. Maybe you'll recognize an old wound that's been activated. Maybe you'll notice that the quality you're criticizing in them is something you haven't accepted in yourself. Or maybe you'll learn that someone you thought was ignoring you has been carrying something you couldn't see. And you don't need to invalidate your own feelings. You're giving those feelings more context. You're allowing the truth to become larger than your reaction. And I also want you to turn those questions inward. Pay attention to the version of yourself that you perform for everyone else: the strong one, the funny one, the caretaker, the independent one. Ask yourself, what part of me hasn't been allowed into the room? Maybe it's the part that needs help, the part that wants recognition, the part that's angry, the part that's tired, or the part that is ready to stop shrinking. You don't become whole by eliminating those parts. You become whole by finally allowing yourself to know them. Because the more clearly you understand yourself, the less likely you are to confuse your fears with someone else's intentions. The less likely you are to ask a new relationship to answer for old wounds. The less likely you are to judge someone for expressing a part of yourself you were taught to hide. And the more compassion you can have for lives you only see in fragments. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. So maybe the goal isn't to see the world with a perfectly clear lens. We're human. We're always going to bring ourselves into whatever we see. The goal is to know what's on your lens before you decide it belongs to everybody else. And respectfully, sometimes the problem isn't entirely what you're looking at. Sometimes it's the place you're looking from. If this episode made you think of someone, please send it to them. Just do so with caution because you might offend them. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please follow the show and leave a 5-star rating on Spotify. It helps more people find it and lets me know that these conversations are connecting with you. I'm Caroline. This is Respectfully, You're the Problem. Please come back and hang out with me next week and we'll work on our shit together.